Hey, hey. This is a video to talk about, the current basing method that I'm using. Just to sort of reiterate this, I've touched upon this before, but just to specify exactly what I'm doing right now. So this is in particular to applying to the Dark Angels army that I'm painting. I had a major spillage here when the wind tipped this over. That's why there's so much mess and waste, because I'm outside. So the thing that I want to say is every army I see is a completely different basing stylistic choice. So for instance, Disciples of Tzeentch, my basing idea with them is to just paint pure gold straight on, and that's it. That is it. All the way around the edges and on the top of the base. And that idea is basically that they are kind of like playing pieces of Tzeentch himself, but they're really illustrious, ostentatious playing pieces. So anyway, the design choice with the Dark Angels army is that it's all kind of essentially like a city fight type of thing, picking through rubble, and all of that's got to base from a really dark grey, of course, because everything's smoky, dusty, broken, brickwork, mortar, and then you can have splashes of silver in that and splashes of other tones and masonry and things like that, but it's got to base up from that grey. And so that grey that I base up from is the Eshin grey, which I treat as a base colour, not as a layer, because it's got a nice darkness to it, and that's what I've been running with for now. Now the biggest issue you get when you're basing minis is basically getting enough paint onto the brush and then getting that paint onto the base to cover it quickly enough, but also the other challenge being to not get it on the model if you've already pre-painted elements of it. So sometimes that's the case, that I've actually pre-painted elements of the model, and sometimes not. So it comes from the build-up of parts. So normal PVA all over the model. Spread it. I spread it with a texture spreader now these days. Get it in every little bit you could conceive, and then I've got a pre-made mix of sand and different sized stones, and then what takes is what takes. And in this case, this is an assault troop, so it's already got like its own little basing thing, so that makes it easier. So that can be painted independently. So we're worrying about the ground here, really, the bit that the sand has dried here, and the edges will just be painted with my final stocks of graveyard earth. I'll have to find something close to that once that runs out, around the actual rim here. It's green here. So to get the grey on in a way that's quick and productive, I take like a container of some sort. In this case, it's like a little medicine measuring pot that you get from buying medicine bottles and stuff. A fairly big brush, so I still like these ones that have the colour tips on. Personally, I'm still using this. So this is a large brush, something of that size, no smaller really. You might want to use something with a fine tip bit for some of the bits where you want less mess created, but here's the knack of it. You take something like this, you pour a bunch of water in, and then quite a lot of water into it. So this is a really watery compound you're making, and then you just keep dabbing in your paint of choice. So you just keep adding it, stir, 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 adding it, stir, 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 adding it, stir, 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 until you get to a consistency where it's essentially runny water, but there's enough pigment in there that it comes up to the side, and it doesn't drip straight down immediately. There's like a momentary pulls, and some of it kind of still stays. That there's pigment going on inside that mix now. give it a little stir, because it will always start to separate, of course, these paints. And by actually applying it like this, you can put it on quite heavily. So here's our Mini, and I'll just blob some on, right? So all I've done there is touch it, and I can't see what I'm doing properly because I'm holding the phone, but just touching it fairly quickly. In fact, I don't even have to be that, you know, and there's a bit of sand showing through in a section there, so I just keep at it, or go at it and kind of wiggle it. And you know those bits where it will resist, where, oh, there's some sand still showing through? You can just go in with a pretty heavy dollop and just saturate it and pull out. And you can see it's, you know, it starts to take, and the grey will start to go on. You know, that little bit there, and you touch that with something and let all the wateriness of the paint soak into that, and you know, it will begin to you know, I've just done this one, for instance. He's got some on the back of his foot, so I might, because where the sand took there, so I might need to scrape that back a bit. You know, there's a bit of extra terrain built up there that was pre-stuck on. You want all that pre-stuck on, basically, if you're doing that. Yeah, I mean, that will dry really quickly, especially outside in this heat. And you can go from there, and then you could, because you essentially created like a pigment ink here, but it's paint. So it goes on easier, and where it's really thin, if some does get onto the model, you can just, you know, wash your brush down with just clean water and get in there and just clean it off. But it won't go on in any, like, it won't dry in any serious way, but it will adhere to the sand in a very serious way, and colour it enough to, because of its strong pigmentation, even though it's a layer and has less pigment than, say, a base colour. It works. And then you can, when this dries, you can go at it with some ink, for instance, Nuln Oil, and some Agrax Earthshade or something like that. You can patch it on, bits here, bits there, you know, and then you could start to do all the dry brushing of higher greys, higher other areas, and, you know, begin to really clean that up with a small dry brush, and get in there and, you know, highlight those areas into a new element. So it's that watery texture that lets you work quickly, efficiently, and avoiding the mess, problematic cleanup that would be required if you were using a stronger version of the pigmentation as paint. So, you know, I just thought I'd share you know, what the process with you while I'm doing it. Just kind of occurred to me, hey, you know, show and tell. Until next time, I'll see you at the table.